It is shameful. It's sort of a good thing that I had a wealth of topics to talk about what's wrong with his record. But it's certainly not a good thing for the women of this district and the women of this country who have been relying on his representation for too long and have been let down by it for too long. So I just want to say a few things about the parts of his record that I find to be the most disappointing. Planned Parenthood is here today. You know, Janine said a few words about what they do and how incredible their work is. Representative Lungren has repeatedly voted to defund Planned Parenthood. And I want to make sure that we all understand what that means. Because the federal government has not funded abortion unless it's the case of rape, incest, or the life of a woman in many decades. So when he votes to defund Planned Parenthood, he is voting to take away access to breast cancer screenings, to cervical cancer screenings, to assistance for new moms and their infants. That is what defunding Planned Parenthood means, and that is what Dan Lungren has stood for. But you know, it goes beyond that in terms of women's health. He's also voted to make massive cuts to WIC. WIC is funding for moms and new children to be able to access the food that they need, such a basic need when it comes to health. Another deplorable vote. And when we think of women's health in a broader context, the Violence Against Women Act. Unfortunately, this year we saw the first time since the act was originally introduced in 1994, we saw this become a victim of partisan divide, partisan division, and we saw Republicans like Mr. Lungren fail to vote for the true Violence Against Women Act and instead support a version of the bill that left survivors out, that picked and chose which survivors were legitimate enough, right, to have access to the services that they need, leaving out, right, that's right, it is unconscionable, leaving out LGBT survivors, immigrant survivors. It's a sad day to see this happen, that we're not standing united, that every victim of violence has a right to the services that she or he needs. You know, another vote is, has anyone heard of the Blunt Amendment? Have you guys heard about the Blunt Amendment? Do you know that there was a similar version in the House? Do you know that Lundgren co-sponsored it? And what this bill does, it's not only about denying women access to contraception on their health insurance, because that's the part we've heard a lot about, and it absolutely could do that. But it's so much broader. It's so much worse for everyone's health, because it could allow any employer, seriously, your employer, it doesn't need to be a religiously affiliated employer, anyone, a restaurant, a bank, any employer, to deny any employee access to any healthcare service for whatever reason. I mean, think about how broad that is. There are employers who are opposed to chemotherapy. That could be gone from health insurance. Just any aspect of healthcare, turning that decision over to an employer. So certainly including women's access to contraception, but it's so much broader than that. But you know, I think we saw a really telling example of where Representative Lungren stands when it comes to women and our ability to make decisions about our health care earlier this year. We heard a lot about that 5-man panel on contraception. But I don't know if everyone heard about what happened next. You know, I was eventually able to testify before a Democratic panel of members of Congress and share the stories of the women I knew who needed access to contraception and whose lives and their health were severely affected because they didn't have it. And that panel was actually not able to be broadcast and to be televised as most congressional panels are, in the same way, because Mr. Lungren denied that in a continuing attempt to silence women's voices, to silence all of our voices when it comes to our own health care. And that's just, I think, very emblematic of whether or not he stands with women and with women's health care.